All right, welcome. In this explainer, we're going to break down a really pivotal moment from the Gospel of Luke. This is it, the beginning of the end, the start of Jesus' final, fateful journey to Jerusalem. Okay, let's jump right in.
Every story has that one moment where everything just shifts. And for Jesus, this is that moment. His ministry up in Galilee is done, and now the whole narrative changes direction. This isn't just about a road trip, it's a huge change in his mission. He's heading straight for his ultimate purpose.
Now, let's talk about the language here, because it's so important. He set his face. That's not just some poetic flair. It's a powerful Hebrew way of saying someone has made an unshakable, resolute decision. So Jesus isn't just meandering toward the capital. No, he is marching toward the cross. He knows exactly what's waiting for him there, and this is him locking in that commitment.
So the journey begins, and almost right out of the gate, they hit a wall. And this first encounter, well, it doesn't just reveal an old conflict. It shows us the very human, kind of raw and flawed reactions of the disciples.
Okay, so to really get why they were rejected, you need a little bit of backstory. The Samaritans and the Jews, they had a long, bitter history. The Jews basically saw them as having a corrupted faith. So when Jesus, a Jewish teacher, sets his face towards Jerusalem, the absolute center of Jewish worship, the Samaritans see that as a direct insult to their sacred place, Mount Gerizim. So yeah, them rejecting him, it was pretty much a given.
And wow, does this perfectly illustrate the massive gap between Jesus' mission and his disciples' understanding of it? James and John, their immediate reaction is pure power and revenge. Hey, Lord, you want us to just incinerate them? But Jesus' response is a quick, sharp rebuke. His journey to Jerusalem isn't about payback, it's about redemption, and he's not about to let it kick off with violence.
So, after dealing with that rejection from the outside, Jesus turns his focus inward. He starts talking to a few potential followers, and he makes it crystal clear, in no uncertain terms, what the intense, personal cost of walking this path with him really is.
So what does it actually take to be a disciple? Jesus is about to lay out 3 scenarios that completely challenge our most basic ideas about things like security, family, and personal commitments.
Let's unpack these, because they are intense. First, he tells a guy that, hey, foxes have dens, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Following me means embracing a life with no guarantees, no stability. Second, he tells another man to leave his father's burial, which was a shocking thing to say in that culture, because the kingdom's work is just that much more urgent. And third, he tells someone who wants to just go say goodbye to his family that once you put your hand to the plow, you can't look back. The focus has to be absolute.
Whoa, let's just pause on this for a second. In Jewish society, burying your parents wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was a sacred duty, one that trumped almost everything else. And Jesus is saying that proclaiming the kingdom of God is an even higher priority. The point here is crucial. Discipleship demands a total reordering of all your loyalties, even the deepest, most important ones.
Okay, so we've heard about the cost of following. Now Jesus pivots to the duties of being sent. And in a story that you only find in Luke's gospel, he sends out a much bigger group of missionaries to go on ahead of him.
You might see this number as 70 or sometimes 72, depending on the ancient manuscript. But most scholars think the number 70 is totally intentional. It's probably a nod to the 70 elders of Israel that Moses appointed. It's like Jesus is setting up a new kind of leadership for the people of God.
And the instructions he gives them are fascinating. First, pray. Acknowledge that you need help. Then, travel light. No money, no bag, no extra shoes. You have to rely completely on God's provision. He tells them to greet no one on the road, which sounds weird, but it means stay focused, because this mission is urgent. And their job is simple. Heal people and tell them the kingdom of God has come near you.
So what happens if they get rejected? No calling down fire, right? Instead, they're told to do this quiet, symbolic thing, wiping the dust of that town from their feet. It was a gesture that basically said, we offered you peace from God, you rejected it, and now you're accountable. It's a solemn warning, not an act of personal revenge.
And this all leads up to the real climax of the passage. The 70 return, and they're absolutely buzzing with excitement from their mission. But Jesus uses their success to teach them one of the most important lessons of this whole journey.
So they get back, and they are just triumphant, and their report is all about the power they had. You can practically hear them. Lord, it was incredible. Even the demons obeyed us when we used your name. They're so excited. But notice what they're joyful about. Their own power, their own success.
And this, right here, is Jesus' masterful course correction.
He basically says, yeah, that's cool, but don't rejoice that you have power over evil. Rejoice that you have a relationship with God. The real miracle isn't what you can do for God. It's what God has done for you. The greatest privilege isn't having authority, it's being known and loved by God. It's salvation.
Now, Jesus isn't dismissing their victory. He actually affirms it with this incredible cosmic vision of Satan falling like lightning from heaven. He's saying, yes, what you did was part of a huge victory over evil. But he immediately pivots to warn them that power can lead to pride. The real, unshakable source of joy is something else entirely. It's knowing that you belong to God.
And that really leaves us with this one last thought. This whole journey seems to be defined by loss, right? The loss of home, of security, of family ties. But in the end, Jesus reveals that the one thing you gain is infinitely greater: the quiet, profound, unshakable joy of knowing your name is written in heaven.